That's something that I'm trying to achieve within running is redefining what a runner can look like. 5 hours to one person might be 8 hours to another. So many people, I think, have this ideology that to be a runner, you tend to be a much smaller frame.
Again, it doesn't take a particularly advanced piece of technology to say Josh is probably quite fit. You know, we look at the volume of exercise you do, not just in around the events, you know, the challenges, but also as part of your daily baseline uptake. And we get a chance to quantify something called your VO2 max, which is an objective marker of how cardiovascularly fit you are. And it's something that's used, again, to determine potential athletic performance in runners, cyclists, lots of things that you do. We normally like a score for a VO2 max of something above 40. You know, people who train quite often would like to be over 45. Good intermittent athletes, rugby players, footballers might be in their 50s. When you start getting over 60, you're into, you know, serious aerobic athletes. And we've got a result for you of 62, which is great. Now, why that's great is for two reasons. A, because it's a massive score, but also because that value is how many millilitres of oxygen per kilogram, and you're not a light guy. In fact, one of the most obvious things about you, for those who are listening, would be that you carry a significant volume of muscle mass. So you're not a waif-thin sort of marathon runner physique, quite the opposite.
Yeah. And I think that's what has intrigued so many people, is that for me, I think that's something that I'm trying to achieve within running is redefining what a runner can look like. You've just nailed it on the head. You know, so many people, I think, have this ideology that to be a runner, you tend to be a much smaller frame. And actually what I'm trying to say is you can be any frame you like. For me, it's more just the enjoyment or the reason behind why you run. And you're right, you know, in terms of the muscle mass density that I might have in comparison, it is much harder, but I think it is just, it's adaptation, right?
But it'll also be down to the fact you would not keep that volume of muscle unless you did significant exercise to keep that muscle. So it brings us almost back out to what you do. We know from the running, ever since I think the first challenge I saw you do was you ran a marathon in your garden during COVID.
Yeah, that's correct.
Which again made me feel inadequate about myself. So thanks for that. But you know, the muscle mass thing is really interesting. So what proportion of your training is dedicated to weights?
Again, great question. S&C was something that I was fundamentally getting wrong. Strength and conditioning, just in case for anyone that doesn't know what S&C means. You know, for me, it was just kind of going into the gym and just lifting weights here and there. And it probably was more the visual than the performance side of things. And so that was something that I've amended. And I've got Nick Garcia, my strength and conditioning coach. He is amazing. And so 3 sessions a week will now be specifically tailored for running specifically. It's not even just like strength, it is tailored to improve, you know, my muscle density, the level of impact that I'm going to naturally be incurring from just stamping on that concrete ground, if that's what it is. The conditioning side of things is really key for the results to come out the way they have there. I and my team will be incredibly happy to hear.
It's a superb result. And I think a lot of people don't realise how fundamental strength and conditioning or resistance exercise is to endurance sport. You know, again, anyone watching those 76 marathons wondering how you did it, you must have had the strength to do it. So I think we see a couple of things. We see a really significant aerobic base, which contributes enormously to energy, but we also see visually another form of fitness that isn't measured here, which is the retention of muscle mass despite all that energy expenditure. So we should probably stop there because it's such a great win. But we're going to march on. We're going to march on. Now, an area you flagged as not being great is sleep. And from a sleep point of view, again, when we look at this visually, we would see on a timeline of the time we measure, green represents when your body's in a state of physiological calm, and we might call that restoring or recharging energy. Red represents physiological stress, blue represents physiological exertion. So we're starting to quantify over the time that you wore the device, how often you're spending in different states. And when we look at sleep in particular, we're interested to see that your sleep actually is pretty good.
That blows my mind because I just feel like I'm constantly awake, although I'm in a sleep.
Yeah. So you're asleep, but
I feel like I'm awake. My mind is so active. Like my thoughts are so active.
Really interesting. There's two different parts to sleep. Your great-grandparents got something from drinking water that you probably don't. Over the last century, we've made water safer to drink, on the whole, but something has been lost in the process. Natural water sources once provided essential minerals that our bodies evolved with over thousands of years. Today's water, even premium bottled source water, contains 78% fewer minerals than it did just a century ago. In fact, you'd have to drink 1.5 bathtubs to replenish the minerals that you lose in a litre of sweat. So if you think your water is hydrating you optimally, think again. Pure Sport, a company that I personally trust and use, solves this problem for high performers through their ultra electrolytes, a science-backed ratio of electrolytes in one single sachet. Optimize your hydration and leave the bath for bathing. Use our exclusive discount code EE10 at www.puresport.co for 10% off. So sleep is, of course, our biggest opportunity to restore energy. In fact, it's really as the human battery puts itself on supercharge overnight. We can restore energy during the day, but that's our big opportunity. What's going on in the physiology is not always exactly the same as going on in the brain. So when people talk about different stages of sleep, you mentioned deep sleep earlier, that's a different brainwave pattern to dream sleep, to light sleep. And you raised a really great point earlier in terms of since your daughter was born, you feel deep sleep has suffered because that's an evolutionary trait, right? You're listening out for her to cough in the night. You're listening out for an intruder who might break in. You're listening out. And if you're in deep sleep, you can't listen out. So what we find in lots of parents or people who are unable to unwind a suppression of this deep or slow wave sleep that means that they're much easier to go into a wake state. That doesn't necessarily mean you won't restore energy. And what we're seeing here is, despite the fact if I measured your brainwaves during sleep, I may not see perfect sleep stages, like you say, an hour of deep sleep, which isn't terrible, by the way. It's not optimal, but it's not terrible. What we are seeing is your volume of energy restoration during the night is really good. And energy restoration is one of the major reasons we go to sleep. So I would expect this person on the chart to wake up feeling relatively refreshed.
I think the only problem is probably the lack of hours of sleep. So for me, I think when you look at them saying on average maybe 8 hours is the most effective, but then you're going to have people that would push back on that and go, well, it's all relative to the individual. 5 hours to one person might be 8 hours to another. I would say on average 6 to 7 hours probably max is what I would get in a night.
Yeah.
Sometimes 5, depending on sort of how late I've gone to bed. But yeah. That's something that I would love to improve on. And I think there are definitely ways in which I can achieve that.
So from this data set, that doesn't cry out for an improvement. Now, your story suggests that there's room for improvement. I think when we look at your sleep, again, I'm interested in how deep your body goes into recovery, and we measure that through a fairly cool variable called heart rate variability. And your transition into sleep means you do go into deep recovery. And one of the major reasons for that will be that you've created what we call quite a significant sleep pressure with all the physical activity you do. In layman's terms, your body gets tired and that drives it into quite deep recovery. So we're seeing another benefit of your physical activity in how deep you go into recovery. Also, you have a strong percentage, 90% of the time that you're in bed, you're recovering energy, which is another good stat. If we were nitpicking on your sleep, it would be the fact that you don't go into recovery until you're asleep. So have you heard of this phrase, sleep hygiene?
No, but I'm about to learn about it.
You are. Now, it's not about washing, because that would be very uncouth of me. Sleep hygiene is about how we clear our mental inbox in that sort of last hour, 90 minutes. In the fact that if we take the example of your daughter, India, you've got to go to sleep believing no one's going to break in. And so how we convince our body that it's got nothing it needs to lie awake solving is largely determined by what we do in those last 90 minutes. So do I abstain from 24-hour news? Do I abstain from a thriller on Netflix? Do I abstain certainly from anything that would raise my core temperature? Do I have a wind-down ritual, etc.? Do you have any ritualistic behaviours around that build up to sleep?
Yes, I mean, what I've really come to realise with sleep is, number one, pillow makes such a difference to my night's sleep. If I don't have a specific pillow, I will not sleep well.
Wow.
So this sounds crazy, the anxiety that I incur from staying at friends' house or hotels, if that pillow is not to my liking, I've written that night off. Basically, I just can't. It's just constantly like trying to find positions. It's the texture of it almost. Not to. I can't even describe it. It's kind of funny because when I actually show people are like, it's not even a pillow. It's one of those weird ones where it's incredibly flat.
Yes,
but it's not firm, but it's just more just for me to sort of like place my head on rather than me sink into it.
Can I assume you take this with you now?
Well, yeah, sometimes now it's got to the point where I, like for the challenge, I 100% took that with me because that for me, it doesn't really matter where I sleep. If I've got that pillow, I'm pretty cushy, to be honest with you. Things like light, I didn't realise had such an impact on me. So I went from having all doors and things open with that natural light coming in, whereas now a completely dark room will change the way that I sleep.